So our concept is to unify the media experiences, animations, simulations, interactive assessments in a single unified context, which in this case is a workplace metaphor situated in facilities typically found in a research park or a technology park, either name or maybe a combination of the two in some form. So the learner enters the application by coming into a 3D space, coming into the reception area in the technology park, in the research park. And this lobby would have interactives that you would do as you would typically find in a reception area. So there might be some informational kiosks, there might be things for visitors to experience that aren't necessarily enrolled in courses, and then there can be a variety of different kinds of resources available for students at large, not just situated there because of some particular learning activity and domain. An example might be blog streams from TechCrunch or whatever might be happening in this main space. So this is more oriented toward the first-time visitor. Then a learner goes into their own area, their own domain space. So it would be their center from their domain, whether it was biotechnology, manufacturing, or ICT. So the learner enters into this space and there might be communications that they receive here. This could be where they actually interface with their console, so it allows them to work with the console features that the app gives them, and other kinds of notifications perhaps that the teacher, resources that the teacher has to be communicating with the students. Just as an example, maybe one context is this large biotechnology research facility. So the learner's understanding that where they are in this context is that they're a worker and researcher in this large facility. Now, of course, the application isn't going to have every single one of these spaces, but providing the abstract context then allows the application to have whatever spaces need to be available for the learner for the activities that they're going to do, and then they can understand those as situated typically in a much larger space. One of the things that this unified app could do is allow us to create some really engaging spaces that these learning activities happen in. So this might be an example of a space that a learner might be working in related to biotechnology. So this isn't a picture, this is just a rendered image from a 3D model, as were all of the previous images. Those were not pictures, those were 3D models. So these would be the spaces that the learners would actually be moving around inside, much like they would experience in a simulation or a game. And then there would be equipments that they would interact with and different experiences that they would do and communications that they can receive and things that they'll hear. And of course, that also is a way for them to be interacting with traditional two-dimensional elements, text, two-dimensional rendered animations, video clips, whatever it might be. In comparison, perhaps this is an example of an ICT space where ICT workers are developing some kind of a new product, and this is the space that they work in. Again, this isn't a picture, this is a rendered image of a model that as we could use as a typical example of what the learners could be navigating around inside in this space. So the architecture would be a client-server, very typical kind of an architecture for an application today, and it would allow ATEP to create one application that would have multiple deployments. So you could think of it as a mobile application that was actually also embedded in a web page, used in the learning management system, as we have been discussing from the beginning. Or it could also just be a standalone executable that you would use on a PC or a Mac. It wouldn't make any difference which of these the learner happened to be launching. So a class of students could be launching this as a mobile app on iPads, or a student could go home and play it on their iPad, or a student could go home and play it on their PC as a standalone, or they could go anywhere and access the LMS. In all of these cases, then, in this architecture, the application would stand alone. Of course, it would be tightly threaded to the content of the learning management system so that it would be available for these learning activities as we had been discussing the isolated discrete medias would be. But it could also be used and be useful completely outside of the learning management system, just used as a standalone application. And it would have its own core set of underlying support features. So it would have its own server architecture and its own database. And then behind the scenes, there would be harvesting of information that would go back and forth between whatever learning management system was being used and the application itself. So in this particular screen, there's just a projection here, a visualization of this same shot that we're seeing, that we were just looking at a moment ago, as might be seen in Course Builder, in the Cengage situation, could be a build out of the LMS, for example, how it might look on an iPad, or how it might look if you were playing it on a PC. So the pedagogical organization of the content is the key driver. And the idea being that there's one context, one metaphor, the workplace, and the workplace is a technology park. So this screen shows just as an idea for point of discussion, organizing perhaps each of the center's domains as having a layer of activities. Perhaps they're scaffold sequences, maybe not. If they were scaffolded, thinking of knowledge and skills builders, then those learning activities, and they're labeled here just 1 through 4, just because that's how we were structuring around the modules previously, then maybe there's 4 learning activities that are scaffolded that the student goes through, and then those skills that are being developed in those learning activities are culminated in a design challenge. And the design challenge is some overarching kind of a learning activity that takes advantage of all of the previous activities. This discussion started with the idea that the biotech team had about having a experience where the student would go through the workplace situation of bringing to market a new insulin product. So in that context then, in the bio center, perhaps there's 4 different activities that the learner goes through along the way, leading to this informed design, engineered, bring a new product to market kind of overarching design challenge. There might be fewer activities than 4, there might be more activities than 4. It's just a suggestion, kind of recognizing how we had organized the content by domain and module previously. So then any number of amounts of text and images and video and animations and interactives then could be woven into these different activities in the overarching design challenge. The idea, though, is not that this app would replace all of the content to be found in an ebook or printed textbook or learning management system. It would just be standalone enough that the materials that would be needed to do the learning activities would be on board or streamed into the app. And then there would be quite a bit of prerequisite activities that the student would need to do in their learning management system or in their book to prepare them to do these activities in the app. Just as a drill down slightly, one idea that we had already worked up for the manufacturing domain was this first learning activity. So perhaps let's say this is just one example of learning activity 1, which is the cutting edge. That's the title of the script that's been developed. And the idea is that the learner is going to go through the process of learning about alloys and then developing alloys for the purpose of creating scalpel blades. And you can see in the lower right hand corner there's some steps to this that the learner is to do. So research the process, then develop the alloys where the learner is going to work with the lattice model, the atomic model, and understand how that alloy is working atomically, and then they would go through the process of heating it, and in this case you would be making changes to your lattice model, applying heat, watching how that heat was changing the bonds in the lattice model, seeing what happens when you do annealing, testing it with a specific testing machine, and then based upon the results of the test, refinement. Repeating the process much as you would do in the informed design process. And this would just be one learning activity. So perhaps this is part of the manufacturing center, and just as an example, over on the right side of this image you can see there's an area where the learner would go and interact with a couple computer screens and be able to see through these large windows into bigger spaces where things were happening. And this would all be very much like this was some kind of work that they were doing to go through these processes in a 3D sense in this space. The app would have some enterprise functions that would be important for both the learners and for the teachers. So the teacher's console would give the teacher the control that she or he would need in order to use the app in this wide variety of deployments. So this console would allow the teacher to set up classes by section, set up all the logins for the users, group the students if that was desirable, be able to see the gradebook and achievements if achievements were used for each student, have access control for the modules so that the learners would be able to only enter into the spaces that they were supposed to go into, be able to see user logs, be able to send communications out in the app that the students would interact with, and then of course have access to reporting. Being able to export out data, whether that data was going to be used in print or be migrated into another learning management system or content management system or wherever, IMS, wherever it was going to go. The learner would have their own console, and in this situation the learner would be able to go in and change their settings, whatever those are that they can customize, be able to see what their progress is, feedback from the teacher, be able to see what badges or achievements they've earned if those are being used, and how many they've earned and what are left, and then of course have communications, whether those are communications back to the teacher or peer-to-peer. So some benefits that this would provide. Firstly, in this standalone deployment, there would be a wide variety of uses that would all be centralized, that would all be synthesized. So this would lend well to this app being used both in a traditional teacher-led classroom situation, but then also informally, where the student might be using it at home. The workplace metaphor provides situated learning, and the unified design of that then strengthens the ability to integrate the domain, each of the three domains, so that we, previously we were discussing having 36 discrete, relatively isolated, smaller media that don't necessarily integrate very well across domains, and there could be a much stronger integration in this context. Having the unified design definitely enhances usability. One interface, one architecture, one system, one general experience. The student very quickly becomes familiar with how the media works, and it's much easier to improve the product and be able to make one improvement that improves the product for all, instead of having to work with a number, what would end up being 36 different design cycles to improve individual smaller challenges having to deal with interface. The single architecture then also allows for greater depth and richness in the experience. Again, the 36 design cycles of making 36 unique medias versus making one application allows for better utilization of production time. So more time can be spent in depth rather than in replicating breadth. So in the end product you have a much richer, much deeper experience. The features and functionalities of the app would not be constrained by really anything other than our resources. Since this would exist on its own outside of the learning management system, then we're not having to decide what kind of features and what kind of integration we're going to have of the media based upon what may or may not be happening with different LMS and ebooks and whatnot. This is a standalone architecture, so there's the only constraints that we have are learning intentions and our own resources in terms of time and people. It gives the project complete enterprise control and access, which would be definitely an enhancement for the research and evaluation aspect of this project. And a number of different feedback systems, again limited only to the desires of the project team. And perhaps most importantly, this would be a develop one build, make one product, and then deploy that in a variety of different kinds of medias. Typically, commercially, they're called SKUs, stock keeping unit. So you have one media, in this case, our one application, and we have one version of it for iPad, one version of it for Motorola Zoom, one version for Mac Web, one version for PC Web, an executable for Mac, executable for PC. All of those are just deployments of the one basic build. So then all of these things would be pretty substantial benefits in taking the time and resources that we have and making the best possible integrated experience for learners.